Now, Iraqi military investigators have discovered two mass graves containing hundreds of prisoners killed by Daesh terrorists just outside the city of Mosul. Now, the bodies of 470 prisoners were uncovered near a Badoush Prison site, which was run by Daesh just before the liberation of Mosul. Second mass grave also contained 30 victims buried in the vicinity of the prison. Search operations are underway inside and outside Mosul. Now, elsewhere in the battered city of Tal Afar, Iraqi forces broke through Daesh's lines there, reaching the center of the old city and a neighborhood around an Ottoman-era citadel. Now, according to a statement from the Iraqi Operations Command, elite counterterrorism service, it captured Nida and Talia districts. Army units and popular mobilization forces have also recaptured the Assad district. Meanwhile, government troops have taken control of a strategic highway linking Tal Afar to Salahuddin province. Tal Afar in Iraq's northwest has served as a supply hub for Daesh between Syria and Iraq. Now, Baghdad says up to 2,000 terrorists are still holed up in the city, many of them foreign nationals. And joining us out of Bristol for more on the stories, Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist. Hello, Tony. Thanks for joining us back on the program. Your thoughts on these mass graves? It's amazing how many mass graves we have discovered in Iraq over the past 6 months. Your thoughts?
Well, it's horrifying, isn't it? And you know what else is amazing is how Daesh or ISIS has managed to survive so long, particularly with the West supposedly trying to crush it. Actually, an organization like ISIS needs to have constant supplies. It needs to have constant supplies of ammunition, of new weapons. It needs to have constant supplies of money. So that is obviously coming through somewhere. I would suggest to you, most likely coming through Turkey still, although that may be not quite as easy as it was before the US attempted coup on Turkey last year, and also potentially through Jordan, possibly also through airlifts and that sort of thing. I think it's pretty clear to most people that there is still some support for ISIS going on from the West, even though, of course, they're bombing them at the same time.
Right, and then, I mean, just to see, I mean, does it seem like the world acted too late to get into this thing against ISIS? I mean, they let Daesh get a hold of such large swaths of land before it really became urgent, and it's still we still haven't seen the cohesiveness we'd like to see in the international community from countries that maybe don't get along on a lot of other political fronts. Why not unite, and why not have united sooner against this atrocity, labeled ISIS?
Well, look, you say the world, but actually it was Russia that made a choice, made a decision to actually do something real to stop them, because the West, what the West loves to do is to pretend that it's fighting somebody whilst the arms firms are making money all the time, usually from supplying both sides. Now, I mean, this latest mass graves, it just shows you that how little regard ISIS has for morals, that Daesh is really not adhering to any of the Islamic morals or Christian morals or any other morals we have. And the idea that they're actually in any way related to the Islamic religion, I think, is farcical. Also, we've got to look at who is ISIS. Rita Katz, who runs the Site Intelligence organization over in Bethesda, Maryland, right down the road from the CIA, supplies the Western media with all of their information and video footage of what ISIS's latest claims are, like, for example, the Barcelona terror attacks. And yet she is a former agent of the Israeli Mossad. So ISIS seems to be very, very close to the Western deep state. That is to say, the arms firms, the banking system, the Goldman Sachs that has been slowly strangling the Donald Trump presidency to take over America, and also the intelligence services like MI6, the CIA, and the Mossad. I think it's pretty clear that the West has been supporting ISIS, and it's only the fact that the Russians have intervened that they've been knocked back. I think it's also pretty clear that they're using American vehicles. We've seen ISIS using US vehicles. And don't forget that this is really down to Bush and Blair in the beginning, starting this whole conflict. I think it was probably planned as long ago as the 1970s that the US wanted to intervene in the Middle East to aid the expansion of its pals in Israel, that it continually funds, even though Israel is a covert nuclear state, Legally, the Americans shouldn't be paying them a penny, but they continue to fund. And all of the disruption in the Middle East really only benefits the Israelis. It doesn't benefit the Europeans or the Americans' foreign policy at all.
And we were going back to funding really quick, Tony, before we let you go. I mean, we know that, Daesh sees a lot of oil refineries, that they stole tons of oil, a lot of jewelry from regular citizens, from stores, from vaults. A lot of artifacts and antiques. Who's buying all this, and why wasn't that never addressed, that they've had this steady supply of income for the last 4 or 5 years just in Iraq alone?
Well, look, I think it's pretty clear, and Scott Bennett in the United States, a former psychological warfare officer, has pointed out that when he was working for the US military, for Booz Allen Hamilton, one of the contractors, and he was investigating the funding of terrorism, he traced much of the money that's going through to the rebels in the Levant, that is in ISIS, in Syria and in Iraq, back through Switzerland. So some of the Gulf states and the CIA and potentially the Israelis too are supplying the money, but I think the Swiss have got a lot of questions to answer about where the actual bank accounts are. The Swiss are very famous about protecting their banking. I think it's about time that they opened up to whereabouts these bank accounts are, because there's definitely, this is, I think, ultimately any terrorist organization's weak spot. Cut off their money and effectively you're cutting off their will to live.